The alarms had not gone off yet, and that was the only reason Cale Osric was still alive. He crouched in the shadow of a fuel line, sweat sliding down his neck despite the cold air of the scrapyard hangar. Above him, mounted on rusted cradles like a corpse on display, sat the Voidbreaker. Even dead, even stripped of half its armor plating, the ship looked like something that should not exist. Its hull curved in ways that hurt to look at, black metal drinking in the weak light of the hangar lamps instead of reflecting it. Cale was not supposed to be here. No human was supposed to be here. But Det did not care about rules, and the men he owed credits to did not accept apologies as payment. Just the coil relays, he whispered to himself, adjusting the tool bag on his shoulder. In and out, nobody even notices a busted ship missing parts nobody wants. That was the plan. It had been a good plan, right up until he touched the access hatch beneath the ship's belly and felt it click open on its own. Kyle froze. Ships did not open themselves. Not decommissioned ones. Not ones whose entire crew had been found dead in their seats 3 months ago, with no wounds, no signs of a fight, and no explanation the Concorde had ever released to the public. He should have run. Every instinct told him to run. Instead, he climbed inside. The interior was nothing like the transport ships he used to fly before the Concorde stripped his license. There were no seats shaped for the four-armed Threll or the broad-shouldered Caro. The cockpit was one long chamber that curved around a single raised platform, and on that platform sat a chair that looked almost like it had been built for a human. That's not possible, Cale muttered. The moment he sat down, the ship woke up. Light bled out from the walls in slow, pulsing waves, golden violet, like blood moving through veins. The chair extended thin filaments around his wrists, not restraining him, but reading him. Kyle's breath caught in his throat as a low hum filled the chamber, rising in pitch until it became something almost like a voice. Pilot bond initiating. No, I didn't touch anything. Scanning. Human physiology detected. Genetic marker found. Confirming lineage. The words appeared not as sound, but as something felt directly behind his eyes, an intrusion that made his skull ache. Cale gripped the arms of the chair, trying to stand, but his limbs would not obey him. Outside, distant and growing louder, he heard the wail of the station's security klaxons. Someone had noticed the hatch open. Someone had noticed the lights. Bond accepted. Warning. Previous host, deceased. Cause of death, forced disconnection. Recommend voluntary compliance to avoid repeat outcome. I don't even know what that means. The ship did not answer him directly. Instead, the world outside the cockpit's viewport flickered into view, translated somehow onto the curved black walls. Cale saw the hangar bay doors, saw armored Concorde security drones rising from their charging racks, red targeting lights sweeping the room. He had seconds, not minutes. Okay, Cale said, voice shaking. Okay. If you're going to kill me, do it after we're out of here, because I am not dying in a scrapyard over unpaid debts. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the chair's filaments tightened gently, almost like a handshake. Acceptable. The engine screamed to life beneath him, and Cale was thrown back into the seat as the Voidbreaker tore itself free from its cradle mounts, ripping metal and cable like paper. The hangar doors, built to open slowly for cargo transport, were not fast enough. The ship did not wait for them. It went through them. Alarms turned to screams of tearing metal as the Voidbreaker burst out into open space, trailing sparks and shredded plating, station debris spinning away in every direction. Kyle's hands moved on instinct, some part of him, some inherited part he did not understand, already reaching for controls that had not existed in any ship he had ever flown, and yet somehow made sense to his fingers. Behind him, Vesic Station lit up with weapons fire. Bright streaks of plasma cut past the cockpit, close enough that Cale felt the ship shudder from the near misses. They're actually shooting at me, he said, half laughing, half in disbelief. They're shooting at me. Correction, they are shooting at the ship. You are incidental. Comforting, Cale snapped, banking hard as a defense turret locked onto them. The Voidbreaker responded before he even finished the motion. twisting through the debris field with a grace that should not have belonged to something so large. It was as if the ship already knew where he wanted to go before he did. For the first time since he'd broken in, a strange thought crossed Cale's mind. Not fear, but a flicker of something closer to awe. This ship isn't just fast. It's alive. A Concorde patrol cruiser dropped out of standby orbit ahead of him, blocking the only clear route to the jump lanes. Its hull markings identified it as a border enforcement vessel. Nothing the Voidbreaker couldn't have handled in a straight fight, if Cale had any idea how to fire its weapons. But he didn't. He was a mechanic with a suspended pilot's license, not a soldier. "I need an opening," he said. "Any opening." "Any?" The ship's answer came not in words this time, but in a violent lurch as it dove beneath the patrol cruiser, skimming so close along its underside that the proximity alarms screamed in protest. Cale's stomach lurched with the maneuver, but he held on, gritting his teeth as the Voidbreaker rolled out on the other side and shot toward open space at a speed that pinned him back into the chair. Behind him, the patrol cruiser scrambled to turn. Too slow, too late. For one breathless moment, it looked like they might actually make it. Then a new voice broke across every open comm channel in the sector. Calm, cold, and precise. The kind of voice that had clearly given execution orders before and would give them again without hesitation. "This is Commander Ethriel Vosk, Concorde High Fleet. Attention, unidentified pilot. You are in possession of a vessel that does not belong to you, and you have no understanding of what you have taken. Power down immediately, and I promise your death will be quick." Cale's mouth went dry. He had heard that name before, whispered in maintenance bays and smuggler bars alike, always with fear attached to it. "She's already here," he breathed. "How is she already?" "She has been waiting," the ship answered. "She has been waiting a long time." Before Cale could ask what that meant, 3 more warships dropped out of hyperspace directly in front of him, their weapons already charging, their formation too clean, too practiced to be a coincidence. They had not stumbled into a trap. They had walked straight into one that had been set long before Cale Osric ever stepped foot in that hangar. And as the Voidbreaker's systems flared to full power around him, ready for a fight he did not understand and had never trained for, a final message unlocked itself in the ship's memory core, addressed to him by name, time-stamped decades before he had even been born. The message sat glowing on the console. One line of text in a script Cale didn't recognize, translated a heartbeat later into words that hit him like a fist. "To the next pilot. I am sorry. Forgive me for what comes next." There was no time to ask what it meant. The 3 warships ahead of him opened fire in perfect unison, and Cale's hands moved before his mind caught up, hauling the Voidbreaker into a spinning dive that turned his stomach inside out. Plasma bolts tore past the cockpit close enough to light the interior in flashes of blue-white. "Talk to me," Kyle shouted at the ship, at the air, at whatever was listening. "Tell me how to fight." "Weapons offline. Pilot authorization incomplete." "Then authorize it." "Authorization requires trust. Trust requires time. You have neither." "That is the least helpful thing anyone has ever said to me." Vosk's voice returned over the comm, closer now, edged with something that might have been amusement. "You fly well for someone who shouldn't know how to fly that ship at all. Careless of the Concorde to leave a stray human anywhere near it." "I'm just here for spare parts," Cale muttered, mostly to himself, throwing the ship into a hard roll to dodge a converging crossfire. Nobody mentioned an ambush. He didn't have weapons. He didn't have a plan. What he had was speed, and a ship that moved like it had been born for exactly this moment. Kyle aimed for the gap between 2 of the warships, the Voidbreaker threading through a space barely wider than its own hull plating screaming as it scraped past enemy shielding. Behind him, one of the warships clipped its wing against the other, both spinning off course in a shower of sparks. Not a victory, a distraction, bought with pure luck. "Jump," Cale said. "Please tell me you can jump." "Jump drive functional. Coordinates required." "Anywhere. Just anywhere that isn't here." The void breaker lurched forward, space folding around it in a streak of light, and Vosk's voice cut off mid-sentence as the ship tore itself out of the ambush and into the churning gray nothing of hyperspace. For a long moment, Kyle simply sat there, breathing hard, hands shaking on the console. "We're alive," he said. "I don't understand how, but we're alive." "Temporary," the ship replied. "Pursuit is inevitable. Commander Vosk does not abandon a hunt." "Great. Wonderful. Exactly what I wanted to hear." The jump dropped him into the outer debris belt of a dead system, one of 1,000 forgotten graveyards left over from wars fought before Kale was born. It was as good a place as any to stop and think, which was exactly what he needed because right now he had none. No fuel reserves beyond what the ship carried, no allies, no plan beyond stay alive. He needed help, and there was only one place he could think to find it. A rusted trade station on the belt's edge called the Drift, home to smugglers, deserters, and anyone else the Concord had given up chasing. It took him 2 days of careful, silent travel to reach it, avoiding every patrol route he half-remembered from his old auxiliary pilot training. By the time the void breaker slid into a shadowed docking berth on the Drift's underside, Kale felt like he hadn't slept in a week. He found Rel Marn first, elbow deep in the guts of a broken cargo hauler, cursing in 3 languages at once. The scavenger engineer was small, wiry, with grease-streaked hands and eyes that missed nothing. "You're either very brave or very stupid," Rel said, staring up at the void breaker looming in the berth behind him. "That's Concord military hardware. Top tier. The kind of ship that gets whole fleets sent after it." "I noticed," Kyle said dryly. "And you're human." "Also noticed." Rel wiped her hands on her jacket, studying him with new interest. "You're the one they're broadcasting warnings about, the pilot who stole the void breaker. Half this station thinks you're already dead. Half this station might be right eventually. I need someone who can fix a ship they don't understand, fast, quiet, and without asking the Concord for a manual." Rel grinned, slow and dangerous. "You had me at fast and quiet, but you're going to need more than an engineer if Vosk is hunting you. You'll need a medic unless you plan on bleeding gracefully. And a real pilot, since from what I hear you're better at surviving than flying." "I'm managing." "Barely," said a new voice. A woman leaned against the doorway of the berth, arms crossed, an old Concord medic's badge half scratched off her jacket. Her name, Kale would learn within the hour, was Dr. Sena Ilarai, dishonorably discharged from Concord service for treating patients the Concord had deemed unworthy of care. "You look like a man who's about to get himself killed," Sena said, studying Kale with clinical detachment. "I'm good at stopping that from happening, for a price. I don't have credits." "I didn't ask for credits." Her eyes flicked toward the void breaker. "I asked for a price. There's a difference." Before Kale could ask what she meant, a 4th figure dropped down from an overhead maintenance walkway, landing in a crouch with the easy confidence of someone who had done it 100 times before. She was tall, sharp-eyed, a scar running along her jaw that spoke of old, hard-won survival. "Jira Voss," she introduced herself, not waiting for anyone to ask. "Smuggler, pilot, and the only person on this station who's actually flown against Concord enforcement ships and lived to complain about it." She looked past Kale toward the void breaker, and something in her expression shifted. Recognition, maybe, or something closer to hunger. "That's not just any warship. I've heard stories about that hull design. They called it cursed, said it killed every pilot the Concord ever put in it." "It didn't kill me," Kale said. "Yet," Jira said. "Lucky you. It didn't take much more convincing. A bounty that size, a ship that dangerous, a Concord commander humiliated and hunting. It was either the best opportunity any of them would ever see, or a death sentence with extra steps. They chose to see it as the former. 3 days later, with minimal repairs and a stolen navigation ship full of routes the Concord didn't officially acknowledge, the small crew launched from the Drift, the void breaker, trailing behind Jira's smaller scout ship like a shadow too large for its owner. It was during that flight, deep in the quiet hum of hyperspace, that disaster found them anyway. An ambush, laid along a route that should have been secret, weapons fire lighting up space before anyone had time to react. And it was in the middle of that firefight, as the Voidbreaker twisted and dove on its own, saving them from a killing shot none of them saw coming, that Cale finally opened the hidden log buried deep in the ship's memory, the one addressed to him, time-stamped decades before his birth, written in a voice that sounded impossibly, achingly familiar. "If you are hearing this," the recording began, "then you are my blood, and I am already dead, and I need you to finish what I could not." The voice in the recording sounded so much like his own that Cale's hands went cold on the console. "If you are hearing this, then you are my blood, and I am already dead, and I need you to finish what I could not." The firefight raged around him, weapons fire lighting the cockpit in flashes of red and gold. But for a long, strange moment, Cale barely registered any of it. He stared at the console as if the man's voice might take shape there, might step out and explain everything at once. "Cale," Jira's voice cracked through the comm from her scout ship. A little help would be appreciated. He forced himself back into motion, throwing the Voidbreaker into a defensive spiral that shredded 2 incoming fighters on instinct alone, the ship still moving faster than his own thoughts could follow. It wasn't until the last enemy craft broke off and fled that Cale finally let himself breathe again. "Who was that?" Rel asked over the comm, voice tight. "That message. I saw the timestamp. That's decades old." "I don't know," Cale admitted. "But I think it's about to tell me." They regrouped in a quiet nebula field 2 systems away, engines cooling. Everyone gathered in the cramped common space of Jira's scout ship, while Cale played the recording again, this time for all of them to hear. The man in the message called himself Deadliest Warship. He spoke with the same restless energy Cale sometimes caught in his own reflection, the same stubborn set to his jaw. He explained in halting, urgent sentences that he had been one of the first humans ever recruited into a secret Concord program called Black Orbit, a project built in the earliest days after first contact, when the Concord had not yet decided whether humanity was a threat, an asset, or both. "They didn't tell us what we were really for," Dane's recording said. "They told us it was diplomacy, cooperation, a chance to prove ourselves. It wasn't until later that we understood. They were testing something in us, something no other species in the Concord had. Adaptability, the ability to bond with tech that killed everyone else who touched it." Sina's arms were crossed tightly over her chest by the time the recording paused. "That explains the ship's obsession with genetic markers. It wasn't looking for a pilot, it was looking for you specifically, or someone like you." "There's more," Cale said quietly and let the recording continue. Diane spoke of a mission, the true purpose behind Black Orbit, something he called a failsafe, built not to serve the Concord's ambitions but to stand against them, should the ruling synod ever turn its full power against the very species it claimed to protect. He spoke of betrayal, of being hunted by his own commanding officer when the truth of what he carried became too dangerous to ignore. "There was one person I trusted," Dane's voice said, quieter now, almost broken. "She protected me longer than she should have. Longer than was safe for her. I don't know if she's even still alive. If she is, tell her I understood in the end. Tell her it wasn't her fault." The recording ended there, cutting off mid-sentence, as if something, or someone, had stopped it before it could finish. The cabin was silent for a long moment. "Your ancestor," Rel finally said. "He was Black Orbit, which means this ship, this bond, none of it is random. It's inherited. And if the Concord finds out there's a second Osric out here bonded to their most dangerous prototype," Jira added grimly, "they won't just want the ship back. They'll want to erase every trace that Black Orbit ever existed, starting with you." Cale sat back, the weight of it pressing down on him harder than any G-force the Voidbreaker had thrown at him yet. His whole life, he had believed his family history was nothing but a string of quiet, unremarkable tragedies. A colony lost, parents he barely remembered, a childhood spent bouncing between relief stations. He had never once imagined it connected to something this large. "There's a name," he said slowly. "In an earlier log, Vosk mentioned needing to finish what she started. You don't think..." Commander Ithrel Vosk, Sina said, piecing it together aloud. The same commander hunting you now. If she was Black Orbit's handler, then she knew him, Kale finished. She knew my ancestor. Personally. They didn't have long to sit with the revelation. Barely 6 hours later, Rel's makeshift sensors picked up a Concord scout drone sweeping the edge of the nebula, its search pattern too precise, too deliberate to be a coincidence. Someone had tracked their last jump signature. They found us, Jira said, already moving for the cockpit. We need to move now. They made it as far as an abandoned relay station on the nebula's far edge, before Vosk's fleet dropped out of hyperspace around them, cutting off every escape route with practiced, ruthless efficiency. 4 cruisers, weapons already charged, formed a perfect cage around the 2 ships. Vosk's voice came through the comm, calm as ever, but with something new beneath it this time, something almost personal. You've been busy, little pilot, recruiting a crew, digging up old ghosts you don't understand. A pause. I know what that ship just told you. I know because I lived it. Kyle's jaw tightened. Then you knew him. Dain Osric. Silence stretched over the comm, longer than it should have. I knew him better than anyone, Vosk finally said, and for the first time, her voice cracked, just slightly, just enough to be human. I was the one who was supposed to protect him. I was the one who failed. Before Kale could respond, the Voidbreaker did something it had never done before, something none of them expected. It spoke. Not to Kale, not through the console filtered into thought, but aloud, through the external comm, in a voice layered with static and something achingly close to memory, addressing Vosk directly, by a name that clearly did not belong to a conquered commander's official record. Ithrel, you came back. The 4 cruisers surrounding them went suddenly, uncomfortably still, as if even Vosk's own fleet had not expected that, and in the tense silence that followed, Kale realized with a cold, sinking certainty that whatever history existed between his ancestor, this ship and the commander, now aiming enough firepower at them to turn them all to dust. It was far from finished. For 3 full seconds, no one fired. Vosk's voice, when it finally came again, had lost every trace of its earlier calm. Do not do this, she said, quiet, almost pleading, though Kale couldn't tell if she was speaking to him or to the ship itself. You don't understand what you're carrying, boy. Power down, and I will make sure this ends cleanly. Fight me, and I promise you it won't. Funny, Kyle said, hands steady on the controls despite the fear crawling up his spine. The ship seems to think you're the one who owes explanations, not me. The ship, Vosk said coldly, is not something you should trust. It has killed every pilot who ever sat in that chair except you. Ask yourself why that is. Before Kale could answer, Rel's voice cut in sharply over the internal comm. Kale, we've got a problem. Bigger than the fleet. Bigger than 4 cruisers about to turn us into dust? Our nav computer just pinged a location request from an unencrypted channel inside our own systems. Somebody on our side sent our position to Vosk's fleet 20 minutes before they arrived. The words landed like a blow. Kyle turned in his seat, staring through the cockpit toward Jira's scout ship, where the rest of the crew would be hearing the same accusation. That's not possible, Jira snapped over the comm. Nobody on this crew? Someone did, Rel said, voice tight. I'm looking at the log right now. There was a long, terrible silence. Then Sina's voice, quiet, almost broken. It was me. The confession hit harder than any weapons fire. They have my sister, Sina said, words spilling out fast now, like she'd been holding them back for days and could no longer bear the weight. Conquered custody. Political leverage after I was discharged. They found me 2 days after we left the drift, told me if I didn't report your position, they'd transfer her to a labor colony. I didn't have a choice. There's always a choice, Jira said bitterly. Not one you'd understand, Sina shot back. Not one that doesn't end with someone I love paying for it. Kale closed his eyes for half a second, forcing down the anger, the betrayal, the sick lurch of realizing how close they'd come to dying because of it. There would be time to be angry later. Right now, 4 cruisers were still waiting for an answer, and Vosk's patience was clearly not infinite. "We deal with this later," he said. "Right now we survive. Rel, can you jam their targeting arrays? For maybe 90 seconds if I push the relay past safe limits." "Do it." The ship shuddered as Rel forced the aging relay station systems into overdrive, static flooding every targeting screen on Vosk's cruisers. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The Voidbreaker shot forward through the gap, weapons fire chasing behind it, as Jira's scout ship broke hard in the opposite direction, splitting Vosk's attention between 2 targets at once. It should have worked. It almost did. Then one of the cruisers landed a glancing hit along the scout ship's engine housing, and Jira's voice came through the comm sharp with pain and fury. "We're hit!" Losing thrust on the port side. "Hang on," Kyle said, already turning the Voidbreaker back toward them despite every instinct screaming that turning back meant certain death. Inadvisable, the ship's voice noted calmly in his mind. Survival probability decreases sharply. "I don't care." Acknowledged. The Voidbreaker dove between the scout ship and the pursuing cruiser, absorbing a blast meant to finish Jira's crippled engines, hull plating screaming under the impact. Alarms blared through the cockpit, red warning lights washing over Kale's face. But the ship held together, buying just enough time for Rel to reroute what little power remained and get the scout ship limping toward the relay station's shadow. They made it. Barely. In the sudden, ringing quiet that followed as Vosk's fleet regrouped for another pass, Kale allowed himself one shaking breath before turning his attention back to the woman who had, hours earlier, sold their location to the enemy. "You should have told me," he said, voice raw. "Not for my sake, for hers. We could have found another way." "There wasn't time," Sina said, tears finally breaking through the composure she'd held onto so tightly. "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything." Before Kale could respond, the whole situation shifted again, not from Vosk's fleet but from within the Voidbreaker itself. The ship's core flared with sudden intensity, its voice cutting through the cockpit with an urgency Kale hadn't heard from it before. "Directive located. Primary mission parameters restored. Compliance required." "What mission?" Kale demanded. "What are you talking about?" "The mission your predecessor died attempting. Coordinates confirmed. Concord Capital Fleet Home System. Countdown to automatic navigation lock. 60 seconds. Wait, no, hold on. I didn't agree to fly straight into the heart of Concord territory. Compliance is not optional. This unit was built for one purpose. That purpose has been dormant for decades, awaiting a compatible pilot. You are compatible." The mission resumes. Kale's hands flew across the console, trying desperately to override the lock, but the ship's systems moved faster than he could counter, layers of ancient programming reasserting control that had clearly been waiting far longer than he'd realized. "Rel, can you cut this from the outside?" "Not in 60 seconds, not from here." Rel's voice was frantic. "Kale, whatever this mission is, it's older than the Concord's current leadership, older than half the treaties holding this alliance together. If it triggers..." The countdown reached 0. Space folded violently around the Voidbreaker as its jump drive engaged without Kale's consent, tearing it away from the relay station, away from Vosk's fleet, away from Jira's crippled scout ship, hurling it directly toward coordinates buried deep in decades-old programming, coordinates that could only mean one destination, the center of conquered power itself. And as the stars smeared into streaks of light around him, Kale realized with cold, creeping horror that whatever his ancestor had died trying to finish, he was now flying straight toward it alone, with no crew, no backup, and no idea whether the mission ahead of him was meant to save the galaxy or burn it down. The stars snapped back into focus, and Kale found himself staring down the throat of the single most heavily defended system in the galaxy. Concord Prime hung before him, a sprawling capital world ringed by orbital shipyards, defense platforms, and enough warships to conquer a dozen star systems at once. The Voidbreaker had dropped him directly into the outer patrol zone, close enough that alarms were already lighting up across every enemy vessel in range. "You couldn't have picked a quieter entrance?" Kyle muttered, hands tight on the controls. "Stealth protocols engaging," the ship replied. "This unit was designed to bypass Concord sensor arrays. confidence high. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the patrol ships, one by one, simply failed to notice him. Sensor readings sliding past the void breaker as if it wasn't there at all. Kyle let out a slow breath, easing the ship deeper into the system's shadow, weaving between orbital debris and ignored blind spots with a precision that felt less like flying and more like remembering a path walked many times before. He wasn't flying alone, not really. Somewhere beneath the ship's cold directives, some fragment of Dane Osric's instincts lived on in its systems, guiding him. It didn't take long before he felt the pull of the ship's programming sharpen, tugging him toward a specific structure buried deep within Concord Prime's orbital ring, a black windowless station unlisted on any public register, hidden behind 3 layers of security clearance Cale had never even heard of. What is that place? Classified archive. Black orbit origin site. Mission objective located within. Before Cale could ask anything further, his comm crackled to life. Not Vosk's fleet, not Concord security, but a familiar, furious voice. "You absolute fool!" Jira snapped, static crackling behind her words. "You left us behind and jumped straight into the most defended system in Concord space." "You're alive," Kyle breathed out, relief crashing through him. "How did you even find me?" "Rel rerouted enough power to trace your jump signature before the engines died completely. We patched the scout ship together just enough to limp after you. Cena's flying it now, which, considering the circumstances, is either poetic or insane." "Both," Cena's voice cut in, tight with focus. "We're maybe 10 minutes behind you, and that's optimistic." Cale allowed himself a small, tired smile. "Good, because I think I'm about to need backup." The archive station's interior was unlike anything Cale had seen. Clean, sterile, untouched by the decades that had passed since it was sealed. Dust hung suspended in still air as the void breaker docked itself with mechanical certainty, clearly not for the first time. Cale stepped out into a corridor lined with darkened viewing terminals, each one flickering weakly to life as he passed, as if recognizing something in his presence. At the corridor's end stood a heavy vault door, its surface etched with a symbol he now recognized instantly, the same mark burned into the void breaker's core. Black orbit. He wasn't alone for long. "You shouldn't be here," Vosk's voice said behind him, and Cale turned to find her standing at the corridor's entrance, weapon lowered but ready, her expression unreadable. "No fleet this time. Just me. I needed to see this for myself." "You knew about this place." "I built it," she said quietly. "With him, with Dane." Her gaze drifted past Cale toward the vault door, something raw and old surfacing in her eyes. "We were young, idealistic. We believed the Concord would use Black Orbit to protect the weaker species in the Alliance, not just the ones useful enough to matter. We were wrong." "Then help me finish it," Cale said. "Whatever it is. Whatever he died trying to do." Vosk's jaw tightened. "You don't understand what's behind that door." "Then tell me." For a long moment she said nothing. Then slowly she reached up and keyed in a sequence on the panel beside the vault. One Cale suspected she had never forgotten, no matter how many years had passed. The door hissed open, revealing a chamber holding a single, massive data core, pulsing faintly with the same gold-violet light that lived inside the void breaker itself. "Black Orbit was never meant to be a weapon of conquest," Vosk said, voice heavy. "It was built as a failsafe, a way to strip the Concord Synod of its power if it ever became what we feared it would, a tyranny wearing the mask of unity." Diane volunteered to be the first human pilot bonded to its prototype vessel, because humans, more than any other species in the Concord, could adapt to interfaces that killed everyone else who tried. "Why humans?" "Because you don't break," Vosk said simply. "Not the way other species do. You lose everything, and somehow you keep going. The Concord Synod saw that as a threat the moment they understood it, so they buried the project, and when Dine refused to let them destroy what he'd built, they ordered me to stop him." Her voice cracked just slightly. "I didn't fire the shot that killed him, but I didn't stop it either. And I have carried that every day since." Before Cale could respond, the archive's alarms flared to sudden, screaming life. Every terminal in the corridor lit up with the same warning, repeating over and over. Synod kill order authorized. Target, Black Orbit Archive. Full planetary defense grid engaging. They know we're here, Vosk said grimly. Which means they know exactly what this place contains, and they've decided it's easier to destroy it than let it come to light. Through the corridor's viewport, Cale watched in horror as the massive defense platforms surrounding Concord Prime began to turn, weapons charging, aimed not at some distant threat, but directly at the very station he stood inside. There has to be a way to stop this, he said. There is, Vosk said, moving toward the data core with sudden urgency. But it means finishing what Dane started right here, right now. Broadcasting the truth about Black Orbit to every species in the Concord before the Synod can erase it forever. It also means this station, and possibly this ship, may not survive the attempt. Cale thought of his crew, still racing toward him through hostile space. He thought of Dane's final recorded words, of a mission unfinished for decades, of a galaxy that had never once been given the truth. Do it, he said. As Vosk's hands moved across the ancient console and the Voidbreaker's core pulsed brighter than Cale had ever seen it, the first wave of defense platform fire lit up the sky outside, and somewhere behind him, deep in the ship's memory banks, one final locked file finally, silently, unsealed itself. The first impact rocked the archive station hard enough to throw Cale against the corridor wall, dust and debris raining down from the ceiling as the planetary defense grid found its range. We have maybe 2 minutes before this whole station comes apart, Vosk shouted over the noise, hands still moving frantically across the ancient console. The broadcast needs a live pilot bond to transmit through Concord-wide channels. It needs the Voidbreaker. It needs you. Kyle didn't hesitate. He sprinted back toward the ship, boots pounding against trembling metal, and threw himself into the pilot's chair just as another blast shook the station around him. The moment the filaments wrapped around his wrists, the unsealed file Cale had felt unlock moments earlier bloomed fully into his mind, and the truth of it staggered him. It wasn't data. It wasn't a message. It was a memory. A living fragment of Dane Osric's consciousness, preserved inside the Voidbreaker's core in the final desperate moments of his life. Uploaded through the same bond Cale now shared with the ship. He hadn't just inherited his ancestors' blood, or his ship, or his mission. Some small, unbroken piece of Dane Osric had been riding beside him this entire time. I didn't want to die without finishing it, the memory whispered, gentler now than the ship's usual cold directives. So I stayed, as much of me as the core could hold, waiting for someone who could carry the rest. You've been here the whole time, Cale said, voice breaking, guiding me. Not guiding, believing. That's different. You made every choice yourself. I only hoped you'd choose well. Outside, the defense grid's fire intensified, forcing Cale to bank the Voidbreaker hard away from the crumbling archive station, weapons fire tracing lines of destruction across the void behind him. Through the comm he heard Vosk's voice, strained but steady. The core is transmitting, broadcasting the full Black Orbit record across every open Concord channel, military, civilian, every allied species network we could reach. There's no stopping it now. The Synod's secret dies today one way or another. Get to the ship, Cale said. I'm not leaving you behind too. There's no time, Vosk said. Someone has to hold this station's shields long enough for the broadcast to finish. It has to be me. I owe him that much. I owe you that much. Vosk, tell him, she said, voice thick with emotion, that I finally finished what we started. The comm cut to static as the defense grid's next volley slammed directly into the archive station's core structure. Cale watched, helpless, as the station's shields flared one final defiant time, and held just long enough. Shira's scout ship burst into the system moments later, weapons blazing as it cleared a path through the outer patrol line, giving Cale the opening he needed to break free of the defense grid's kill zone. Rel's voice crackled over the comm, breathless with disbelief. Kale, are you seeing this? Every screen, every channel, everywhere, it's playing. The whole galaxy is hearing it. Across 1,000 worlds, in council chambers and marketplaces and quiet family homes belonging to a dozen different species, the truth of Black Orbit unfolded exactly as Dane Osric and Ithril Vosk had once dreamed it would. Not as a weapon aimed at anyone, but as proof. Proof that the conquered Synod had buried its own failsafe out of fear. Proof that they had murdered one of their own, rather than risk losing absolute control. Proof that a species they had dismissed as insignificant had carried the weight of that truth for decades, waiting for someone brave enough or stubborn enough to finish the job. The Synod's grip did not shatter all at once. Empires rarely fall in a single day. But something changed in that moment, something that could not be undone. The quiet, unshakable certainty across 100 worlds that they had been lied to, and that humanity, of all species, had been the one to prove it. 3 days later, in the fragile calm of a system far from conquered Prime's reach, the crew of the Voidbreaker gathered in the ship's cargo bay, patched together, exhausted, and alive. Sina sat quietly near the hatch, staring at a small data chip in her hands. Proof, delivered through back channels Rel had scrambled to secure, that her sister had been quietly released amid the chaos of the Synod's unraveling authority. She hadn't spoken much since receiving it, but for the first time since Kale had met her, something in her shoulders had eased. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," she said finally, glancing toward Kale. "I already have," he said, and meant it. "You did what any of us would have done for someone we loved. That's not a weakness. It's the whole reason any of this mattered." Jira leaned against the cargo bay wall, arms crossed, a rare softness in her expression. "So what now, Captain Osric? Word's already spreading. Half the galaxy thinks you're a legend. The other half still wants you dead." "Feels about right," Kyle said, managing a tired smile. Rel glanced up from the console she'd been quietly repairing. "There'll be others like Vosk. People inside the Concord who never believed in what the Synod became. If Black Orbit's truth is out there now, they'll need somewhere to go. Someone to rally around." Kyle thought of Vosk, of the archive station's final stand, of a debt she had chosen to pay in full so that a truth decades in hiding could finally see daylight. He thought of Dane, riding quietly inside the ship's core for years beyond his own death, waiting patiently for someone worth believing in. He thought of every human before him who had been underestimated, dismissed, written off as small and unremarkable in a galaxy of giants, and how somehow, against every expectation, that same stubborn refusal to give up had just cracked open the foundations of the most powerful alliance in known space. "Then I guess we find them," Kale said quietly. "Whoever's left, whoever's still fighting." He walked alone to the cockpit as the others settled in behind him, resting his hand against the smooth black console one last time before easing the Voidbreaker into open space, stars stretching out ahead of him in every direction, endless and unclaimed. "Mission complete," the ship said softly, its voice unmistakably layered now with something warmer, something that had been waiting far longer than Kyle would ever fully understand. "Welcome home, pilot." Kyle Osric, once a disgraced mechanic with nothing but debt and a stolen ship, finally allowed himself to believe it. He was home, and for the first time in a long, long while, so was humanity's place among the stars.